last type of pragmatic strategy, we have trans-editing technique. This technique needs editing on source language before translation. So here, before we are going to translate the source language, we have to edit the source language firstly, because the quality of source language very bad. Well, for the next, we are going to discuss about translation techniques. Translation techniques is a procedure that we use to analyze and classify how translation equivalence works. So here we use Molina and Albert book to discuss about this translation techniques. So here Molina and Albert classify the translation into 18 techniques based on the following 5 criteria. Here are 5 criteria that Molina and Albert used to classify translation techniques in their book. So for the first criteria is to isolate the concept of technique from other related notions. So for the second is to include only procedures that are characteristic of the translation of text and not those related to the comparison of language. So for the third is to maintain the notion that translation techniques are functional. So for the fourth is in relation to the terminology to maintain the most commonly used terms. So for the last criteria, here we have to formulate new techniques to explain mechanisms that have not yet been described. From those 5 criteria, Molina and Albert classify translation techniques into 18 types. For the first, we have adaptation. Adaptation is the replacement of the cultural element of source language into the culture of target language. It also needs finding appropriate or suitable word in translating the text in order to have the same meaning from source language. So here we propose to have as much as possible same meaning of the target language as the source language. Here we have an example, changing the word wolf into kancil in a translation into Indonesian, because here wolf described as a smart animal. Well, for the next we have amplification. This technique is used to introduce details that we don't find in the source language, such as information, applicative, and also paraphrasing. Here we have an example. Ramadan is translated into Ramadan, and we add the information, the Muslim month of fasting. So for the next, we have borrowing techniques. As we know that borrowing is also a kind of semantic strategy. So here, borrowing is a type of translation that takes a word or expression straight from another language. We don't change much for this technique. So here, borrowing divided into 2 types. For the first is pure borrowing. It means without any change. There is no changing there's no chance in this technique for pure borrowing. So for the second, we have naturalized. It is used to fit the spelling rules in the target language. Okay, here we have an example for pure. We have horizon, stereo, and also urine. So for naturalization, we have goal, informasi, and task. Well guys, let's we continue for the next technique. So here we have cock. It is the literal translation of a foreign word or phrase. It can be lexical or also it can be structural. So here we have an example. The English translation Police Academy for the Indonesian Academy Policy. So here Police Academy we translate into Academy Policy. Well, for the next technique, we have compensation. It is to introduce a source language element of information or stylistic effect in another place in the target language because it cannot be reflected in the same place as in the source language. So here we have an example translation of English. Me exclaimed Mrs. Albert Forrester for the first time in her life regardless of grammar into Indonesian. Apaan? Teriaknya. Albert Forrester untuk pertama kali dalam hidupnya lupa pada tata bahasa. Next, we also have description technique. Description technique means to replace a term or expression with a description of its form or and function. Here we have an example. Translate English cow creamer into Indonesian's poci yang berbentuk sapi untuk tempat susu.
Okay, there is discursive creation. It is a kind of translation technique that establishes a temporary equivalence that is totally unpredictable out of the context. This technique is usually used to translate a work title using another point of view. So you can check the example here. In the search language, there is Husband for a Year. It is a title of the story by Rebecca Winters. In the target language, the sentence is translated into suami sementara. The other example in the search language is a betrayed son Malin Kundang. In the target language, it is translated into si Malin Kundang. Next, establish equivalent. Establish equivalent technique is a translation technique that puts forward the prevalence or reasonableness of translation in the target language. This technique, by using of the term or expression recognized by dictionaries as an equivalent in the target language. So let's see the example. In the search language, efficient and effective, while in the target language, efisien dan efektif, or the other meaning, sangkil dan mangkus. The other example in the search language, there is, my mouth gets water every time I see burgers. In the search language here, we immediately guess the meaning of the word water is berair. But in the target language, the translator changed the sentence into saya selalu ngiler jika melihat burger atau saya selalu ngiler setiap kali melihat burger. Not mulutku berair setiap kali melihat burger. If the translator write or change the sentence like that, mulutku berair, it is not suitable in the target language because there is no equivalent term.